John chapter 7. The Pharisees were chickens. After these things, Yeshua was walking in all right, we're studying the book of John chapter 7. Grab microphones and chit chat, not just sermon. Okay. So after these things, Yeshua was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. As we find out later, they're still sore about him healing somebody on Shabbat. It's been a while. It's been a while, and they went home and they stewed about it, right? That's not normal. Or actually, it's more normal than it ought to be. Holding grudges, you know? So if you guys watch The Chosen, which I only watched 2 seasons of it, they do illustrate this. They show that they have a scene where somebody who saw him heal on the Shabbat, it goes back to Jerusalem, and they're opening books and studying and trying to find out if it's real or not. They embellish. It's not meant, the Chosen is not meant to be an exact replication of what happened in the first century. It's artistic. It's very accurate in some regards. And this is also something with people who are holding grudges. Because do we see any of this, the news today? You see anybody holding grudges, bringing up stuff from the past? Yeah, that's basically all our news is. It's all of it, right? If you do, and even in your work, if you have a situation that you have to make a decision, the first thing people do is look for a precedent. What happened last time, right? As if the last time you were accurate, right? You have to do it again. So they were sore. And John still calling it the Feast of the Jews. John was a Jew, so was Yeshua, all the apostles. So maybe someday we'll find out why he phrases it that way. But the Feast of Booths was near Sukkot, and his brothers said to him, "Leave here, go into Judea, so that your disciples may see your works and what you're doing. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. If you do these things, show yourselves to the world." Boy, he's just getting it from all angles, isn't he? His brothers do not sound nice. What did this remind me of? What did it remind you guys of? Anybody else in the Bible this might remind you of? Young man named Joseph, whose brothers were not too keen on him. And he also didn't go out to tend when they went out to tend. He came later, and they killed him for it. So Yeshua comes out later because they're trying to kill him. It's a little parallel, not exact, right? It says not even his brothers were believing in him. Well, go ahead.
So I'm reading a Bible that has footnotes where you can see that almost every other verse in John is referring back to some prophecy. It's really cool. And I didn't bring the Bible, which is really sad, because for this verse, there's actually a prophecy that his own brothers wouldn't believe in him.
Well,
maybe you know which verse that is.
I happen to have those same cheats. Let's go find them.
Nice.
Right here. Is it Jeremiah? For even your brothers and the household of your father, right? So if you get the e-sword and you put TSK cross references on it, it's pretty handy. Not 100%. Sometimes they miss stuff. But a lot of times they catch stuff because no human being can remember it all, right? So let's go look and see what Jeremiah says here. So even your brothers and the household of your father, even they have dealt treacherously with you. Even they have cried aloud after you. Do not believe them, although they may say nice things to you. So was that the one you were thinking of? Okay.
It explicitly says like your brothers.
Well, see, this is one of the times when it lets me down. All right. Okay. Marston's looking it up. They're really not, they're goading him. And the other part about this that I tied to Joseph is that they're goading him to go show himself in public to the people that want to kill him. It's entirely possible that his brothers are trying to get him killed right here, or they're trying to push something to make him reveal himself. Everett?
Well, I think also they may not believe that he's being plotted against as much as he is.
Right.
What I wanted to mention was verse 2, the feast of the Jews. Of course, there may be more to it than that, but certainly the difference was that they all had to go to Jerusalem. And that was unique to the way the Jews celebrated the feast. You don't read anything about that in the rest of the New Testament. The Corinthians are told to keep the feast, and it's talking about Passover, but they're not told to be in Jerusalem to do it. And if they did go there, they'd have to be circumcised. So, that is a difference. It may not be the entire difference, but there may be other things, but that certainly is a unique thing about the way the Jews did.
All right. The what?
The Jews sometimes would move the holy days out because they wouldn't allow a double Sabbath because they required a preparation day.
Yeah.
Due to their tradition, not to what God said. So he might be referencing the days that are being kept by the Jews.
Yeah, I think they were messing with the calendar, which is why it says Feast of the Jews. Like, I think that's why I used that language.
So I understand that, but Yeshua gave the priesthood the authority. He respected the priesthood. So the only people that can call the calendar are the priests. Even Yeshua couldn't call the calendar when he was on earth. So whatever the high priest said was a new moon, was a new moon. Whenever the high priest said it was a year, it was a year. We did you couldn't like go up there and be like, no, man, your calendar's wrong. Right? Right. It's not even a thing, right? So it's Numbers 5, I think it is, 1 through 10, where it talks about blowing the silver trumpets. So only the high priest has the authority to determine a calendar. So whatever they did was the calendar, right? And I'm pretty sure because I got into the postponements discussion with somebody, and I looked in some Jewish references about the calendar, and I don't know, it's not, I don't want to say it's not important enough to me but I didn't spend a lot of time on this, but it seems that you guys are right, that they did that at this time, right? A lot of people want to say that the Hallel 2 calendar was started like the day that it was released, but it didn't. He was just releasing the calculations to everybody that they'd been using for a very long time. So, but only the high priest has the authority to call to let those silver trumpets be blown. And let's just look. I got a Bible right here. What the heck, right? It's a good Bible, good study. Numbers 5, Numbers 10. There they are. Yahweh spoke further to Moses, saying, make yourself 2 trumpets of silver. So these are not shofars. They're called katzet soret. It's a different word than a shofar. Of hammered work you shall make them, and you shall use them for summoning the congregation and for having the camp set out. When both are blown, and all the congregation shall gather themselves to you at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Yet if only one is blown, then the leaders, the heads of the divisions of Israel, shall assemble before you. But when you blow an alarm, the camps that are pitched on the east side shall set out. When you blow an alarm the second time, the camps that are pitched on the south side shall set out. An alarm is to be blown for them to set out. When convening the assembly, however, you shall blow without sounding the alarm. The priestly sons of Aaron, moreover, shall blow the trumpets, and this shall be for you a perpetual statute throughout your generations. When you go to war in your land against the adversary who attacks you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, that you may be remembered before Yahweh your Elohim and be saved from your enemies. Also in the day of your gladness and in your appointed feasts and on the first of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be as a reminder of you before your Elohim. I am Yahweh your Elohim. So there's some things in the Torah that just don't apply to us, and this, in my estimation, is one of them. And what happened after the Sanhedrin fell, before Hillel, when the Sanhedrin moved from Jerusalem, because it was part of the history, is that the Pharisees try to say that they weren't compromisers, but their guy, I forget his name, was smuggled out of Jerusalem when Hadrian had it surrounded, and he went and made a deal, and he said, if you will let us move the Sanhedrin to this other place, then we'll surrender. And so they did. So the Pharisees were preserved because they were okay with the Sanhedrin moving away from Jerusalem, because the Pharisees had their base of power where? Where was the Pharisees' base of power?
People,
Go ahead.
the people.
The people. Yes. The synagogue. The Pharisees ran the synagogues. The Sadducees held the Sanhedrin. The Sadducees were the people who had the authority to set the calendar, to set the feast, to set everything. So the Pharisees go make a deal with the Romans to move the Sanhedrin. So the Sadducees all die in AD 70. The Pharisees live. And the Pharisees at that point take over the Sanhedrin. So if there was a shift in the calendar, that would have been the moment, right? Because they would have, if they were going to do something differently. And so then the Pharisees had the Sanhedrin. I wish I could remember the city. There's an article I wrote about
Yavne?
this somewhere. Huh? What's that?
Yavne. Yavne.
Sounds familiar to me, right? Right. And so they set up a Sanhedrin, and so they were making the Holocaust and having the center of power because Jerusalem was destroyed. Now, it makes sense that the Pharisees would do this, by the way. It's not exactly treacherous, because the Pharisees were the people who knew the whole Old Testament, right? The Pharisees are also the people that Yeshua used to spread the gospel, because they owned the synagogues and the Sadducees owned the temple. The Pharisees were okay learning new stuff. The Sadducees were first 5 books only, nothing else. So the Yeshua was very critical of the Pharisees, but the Pharisees, having the synagogues planted all over the place, provided a system for spreading the gospel. So now with the Sanhedrin moved, it was in place until like 300 and something, when the Romans finally said, you don't get to have that anymore either. And that's when they got disbanded, and they released how they calculated the calendar, because they didn't want people doing what? Exactly what we do, right? Right? What we do is we have all these different calendars and people celebrating on different days and at different times. So they released their calculations so that people would have a way of staying united. And anyway, that's a history of that. And I looked up the calculations, and it's math. It's like calculus. It's on JewishEncyclopedia.com if you want to go read how they do it. But it's pretty far out there. And that's my education on that one. But the reason I got on that tangent is whenever Yeshua healed somebody, he said, go wash, go show the priests, right? He didn't ever say, like, he said the temple's coming down. He didn't say you don't have to listen to them, right? And when Paul brought back his wares, because Paul took a collection for all the saints, where did he take that stuff when he came back? It's in the book of Acts. To the temple, right? He took all of the food that he collected when he went on his ministerial journey to the storehouse of the temple. He didn't take it to a different warehouse that the apostles were running, right? Right, in tangent. He followed the Torah and took that for all the people. And then when he was accused of breaking the Torah, he said, wait a minute, they accused me of breaking the Torah. They found me in the temple following the Torah, right? So he was still respecting the priesthood, up until the end. And which is difficult because we know that there was no Ark of the Covenant in that temple, right? Right? Like, what were they doing, right? Anybody else want to go off on this tangent with me? Because when John the Baptist's dad got his vision, where was he? In the temple doing his job without the Ark of the Covenant. What was he doing? Right? Right? I don't know. It doesn't add up to me. But yeah.
There's a book, the Jews in their land. There's more to the title than that, by Gedaliah alone. And he mentions that there was a big controversy among the Jews in Jerusalem and in Babylon as to who sets the calendar. And ultimately, they all had to admit that it was the high priest that set the calendar. But there's an interesting scripture, of course, in Leviticus 23 in verse 4. These are my, appointed feast appointments, which you, plural, shall proclaim. It's not telling Moses that he's supposed to proclaim these things, but they were supposed to be unified. And of course, you've got to be unified under the high priest. But when you don't have a high priest anymore, you can choose the calendar that he picked, or you can have the chaos that we have.
Yeah. It's the worst experience we had with it was one year we were at the Wewoka Sukkot. Every day was somebody's Sabbath. They even had the moon, the people who set the weekly Sabbath on the moon. So there was somebody was running a chainsaw on Sabbath because they were like, well, that's not the real Sabbath. Tuesday afternoon is. It's like every day of the week, somebody's Sabbath, and you just couldn't function, So but for us, right, knowing that the calendar is going to be changed at some point back to whatever it's supposed to be, or to something that maybe has never been perfect, right? Knowing it. So when we went down there the first time and opened up the spreadsheet to look at the calendar, and noticed that they had one day off for the Sabbath. You know how easy it was for us to go, we're on their calendar. Okay, we're in their camp. This is their calendar. We're on it. Right? They were one day off of the one that we keep. So we said, oh, all right, cool. Right? We're in their camp. We're not going to be like, we're just going to honor their thing and off we go. Right? And so then that's what we did for about 5 years. But except for the year when they were all running the chainsaws, like chainsaws because for firewood or whatever, right? They actually did have to start making some rules after that year because there was just so much disparity. Yeah. But that's it. I mean, if you're in, for me, if you're in somebody else's, like if we go visit somebody else's congregation, we're in their house, right? You just got to kind of do what they do, unless it's, some strange thing, but, like what? Eating bat heads? No, not going to the Church of Ozzy, right? Oh, the Osborne Church. Hey, look, verse 4, right? Yeah. So Yeshua said to them, my time is not yet, but your time is always opportune. The world cannot hate you, but hates me because I testify of it, that its deeds are evil. Go up to the feast yourselves. I do not go up to this feast because my time is not yet fully come. So he's kind of telling them that you guys have the ability to make change. You know, you don't need to wait for me. He says, your time is always opportune. They don't have the baggage of being the Messiah. They are, son of Joseph, right? Isn't James one of these brothers here that are not believing? Right? So he's saying, you guys can go teach the truth. You don't have to, you have nothing to worry about. Nobody's trying to kill you, right? You you can go do it. And my time's not yet. And it says the world hates me because I testify of it that its deeds are evil. They're probably looking at him like, we know you, buddy. What do you mean the world hates you? You just left Bethlehem the one time, right? Right? So he's ginning up some stuff. Now, did he lie? Go ahead.
I don't know if anybody uses this scripture to say, well, Christ was on a different calendar, but if he did, then he told them to go up to the feast. He didn't condemn them for going up early,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure enough. Yeah. He did go up to this feast. Well, this feast. So they would probably say, it's not the feast or something. I don't know. But he did go to it. Did he lie to them in verse 8?
Yeah. Well, he came later.
Yeah. Yeah. So April says it would have been sin if he didn't go. Right? Because he had to keep the feast, because everybody has to keep the feast. No, we're not experiencing an earthquake. It's my granddaughter on the floor bumping into the calendar. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I think in verse 8 there, it says, you go up to this feast. I am not up to this feast now, for my time has not yet been fulfilled. So this was a Feast of Tabernacles. He was killed at the Passover. His time wasn't fully, he wasn't ready yet. So he went up secretly, next couple of verses. But also in the Encyclopedia of Judaism, volume 1, it does say there, in ancient times, the special walk was kept in Jerusalem for the first appearance of the new moon. And so they sent a couple of men, you take 2 men and they sent a couple of men up in different hills to watch for the new first little thin crescent of the new moon. And then they come back down and tell the priest, okay, we saw the new moon. And so there's 2 witnesses and they agreed.
Yeah.
So that was their new moon. And that was during the time when Christ was in Jerusalem. That's what they did then. So that's how they kept the new moon then. And then in the same paragraph, in the Encyclopedia of Judaism, it says Rosh Hodesh was gradually demoted to minor liturgical status and a prohibition on work was removed. So
the prohibition of work was removed on the new moon day. The Jews did that. So apparently there was a time when the new moon day was a holy day. I wasn't there then, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it just says that the prohibition of work was removed. So apparently there was a prohibition of doing any work. It was another Sabbath day sometime when.
Yeah, but they would have had to have added that, because that's not in the Torah. So they would if they added it and then took it away, right? You know what I mean? So yeah. Okay. Yeah. But they still had to go to the priest to tell them to blow the shofar, right? So until that shofar was blown, it wasn't right. Thousands of people could see it, but until the shofar was blown, it wasn't. You follow me? Because they had to give the authority to the priesthood. So that's, and I don't know. I guess they just have a process. You got to have a process, I suppose. Right. Yeah.
I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say nothing.
Right. Um, yeah, with the taking the new moon as a Sabbath today, right? I mean, I don't see anybody in the New Testament doing that. Or I don't see it in Josephus either, but I haven't read Josephus in a long time. Lately, it's been coming up though, and I've had to go get it off the shelf and look stuff up. Right, right. But maybe. But Everett, go ahead.
Yeah, there's of course Colossians 1:16 or 2:16 that kind of connects the new moon with the Sabbath and the Moedim. But it doesn't really say it's a Sabbath. It says let the church decide, what you do. And of course, the example from, it seemed to me, the Torah is that, well, the priest is supposed to blow the trumpet. You're supposed to have an assembly. But there's really nothing else that is specified for the new moon.
Yes, and I've seen people use David and Saul to talk about this too, because David didn't show up for the ceremony to sit next to Saul when they were waiting for the new moon.
They had a special meal, yeah.
Yeah, but I think if I recall, I think it was because they didn't know when it was going to be. It was like days long type thing, right? And so, I just don't see, like, I see we have the festival days and the weekly Sabbath. If we threw in the new moon as well, because you'd have to wait for it to be sounded and sighted, there'd be a whole lot of doing nothing going on all year long, right? That would increase the doing nothing to, it'd be like having Yom Teruah every month, right? Feast of Trumpets, right? Feast of Trumpets is the day that no man knows, right? So everybody kind of, you kind of know it's been 28 days since the last new moon, right? So you kind of get ready for it, and then they would blow the trumpet and, sound it, and then everybody would stop working and have a festival. You would have to duplicate that 12 times a year. So that means that people would stop working, basically every 28 days and wait to have a Sabbath. So that you just really have a lot of doing nothing going on.
All it requires is the people are observing, which is going to happen at night, not during the day. The observation of the new moon will be at the dark at night. So if they would blow the shofar, the trumpet at night to alert everyone that tomorrow is the day that will be observed.
Okay, now that's if you lived in proximity to the temple. What if you lived way up north, right? It could be a while before they find, you know what I mean? Before it gets up there, right? And so yeah. Yeah, but that's not the Sabbath. Right, right. Yeah, we all can count to 7. Yeah, yeah. So, anyhow, so he stayed in Galilee. His brothers had gone up to the feast, and he himself also went up, not publicly, but as if in secret, because of what Art said. And I think I might have even had that here, because Sukkot wasn't the feast that he was going to get killed at, right? It was Passover, and they're going to have the palms put down. He comes in on a colt and all that. So that's very, very accurate as well.
Yeah, maybe he went up in secret, like, because like people were looking to kill him. And I think in that situation, like, lying or fibbing to save your life is not a sin. And we see that in the Bible, like when the midwives spared Moses and they said one thing that wasn't truthful, but they were saving lives.
His wife was his sister.
Abraham.
Yeah.
Abraham, yeah, lied about Sarah being his sister. She was his sister, though, kind of creepy. But yeah, but the other part of this going up in secret, is he's going undercover to see if the city is talking about him, to see what they're saying about him, to kind of feel things out. Because this is pretty early in the ministry yet, and he's done some stuff, outside of Jerusalem. So he wants to go and hear what's happening. And so, he shows up and he's listening around incognito, and they couldn't even identify each other. How Judas had to sell him out by with giving him a kiss, and the fact that everybody kind of looked the same, dressed the same, that he could kind of blend in. And there's much grumbling among the crowds concerning him. Some were saying he's a good man. Others were saying, no, on the contrary, he leads the people astray. Yet no one was speaking openly of him for fear of the Jews. Now think about how much the Jews are what's called poisoning the well, right? They're poisoning the well about this guy, and they're apparently so powerful that they're controlling speech the same way dictators do. That's a little bit eye-opening, I think, that the people can't talk openly, not because of their government, but because of their religious leaders. That's bad. But then again, what happens is you guys who were in, the churches that you disagreed with, right? Right? What happens when we disagree with these established churches? It doesn't go well for us, right? There's some doctrines you just can't ever talk about, depending on where you are, So when it was in the midst of the feast, Yeshua went up to the temple and began to teach. And the Jews were astonished, saying, how has this man become learned, having never been educated? And that's one of their big problems, is they don't know what box to put him in. Was he educated under this rabbi or that rabbi, or in this university or that university? And our world had very quickly, we reproduced this same paradigm. If you look at the early church fathers, how if you were like with Marcion, or if you were with the Western people, or if you even Paul says, knock it off. I have Apollos and I have this person. I have that. This is such a big problem that people keep aligning under organizations, and it's something that's inherent in us. It's something that mankind wants. When they said, give us a king, and they were rejecting their heavenly king, but they just wanted to have somebody tell them what to do. Isn't that our society today? Isn't it? So there was a governor of Mississippi. His name was Barbour, Barbour, Haley Barbour. And a big hurricane came, humongous hurricane came. And this is the governor of a state with a National Guard and a budget and everything. And when it happened and he needed help, what did he go and help people? He stopped and said, I need Washington, D.C. to come help me, right? He wanted to be able to point the blame at somebody else. And he didn't want the responsibility, even though he was the duly elected governor of that state. He wanted to be able to blame somebody else, kind of like Eve in the garden. Eve knew what to do, and she had the authority to say no, and she didn't. And she goes, he deceived me. And then he looks at Adam, and Adam goes, she deceived me, right? And this is something that's innate in us, is to want to have a leadership and want to align under some group. Today, oftentimes people will say that they can't make a decision based off of, some event happens that's quite obviously against the law or against the Constitution. And they go, well, we just have to wait for the lawyers or the court to sign in on this, right? They want to be able to shift the blame to other people, and they want to be able to have control over their pupils and or disciples as it may be. And they're astonished. Where did he get this knowledge? We're supposed to have the the corner on that market. You can't have somebody else getting this knowledge, you know? And today it's even more absurd because as people are leaving organized school systems, because all the information that a school is going to teach you is available on the internet, right? And you don't have to go and you don't have to go buy the latest Funkin' Wagnalls edition of a book anymore. And so the universities are, still having to hold on to this, because if somebody says they're from such and such university, they get more prestige than from a different university. But as my daughters are coming out of community college, they are being taught by people who did teach at Brown, who did teach at Columbia, who are using the same exact books. They're getting the same exact education, but it's a community college, right? Where did you get your information? As if you got it if you get the same information from a different place, the information is somehow tainted. Verse 14, he was using the crowd as a defensive mechanism because the Jews wanted to kill him, but they didn't want to kill him publicly. He pushed that issue. He pushed and pushed and pushed to get them to execute him publicly later on. At this point, he's using the crowd as saying, it's, basically without saying it, you guys gonna do me in here? And all these people with the witnesses that I haven't actually done anything wrong? Are you guys really gonna do that? And that's pretty wise of him too. Then, of course, he has to come. Oh, yeah, verse 15, he's teaching. They're astonished, saying the man's become learned, never been educated. What do we have to do to establish somebody as a prophet? What's the baseline of a true prophet? What did you say? No, not.
The prophecies have come true.
Not, that's actually second.
They advocate the keeping of God's instruction, but also what they say comes to pass.
Yeah. What they have to, if a prophet or a dreamer of dream arises among you, gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder comes true concerning which he spoke, saying, let us go after other gods, let us serve them. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for Yahweh your Elohim is testing you to find out if you love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul. You shall follow Yahweh your Elohim and fear him. You shall keep his commandments and listen to his voice, serve him and cling to him. But that prophet or dreamer of dreams shall be put to death because he has counseled rebellion against Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery, to seduce you from the way in which Yahweh your Elohim commanded you to walk, so you shall purge the evil from among you. The first test is that they have to teach correctly. They can't teach contrary to the Torah. They can't come and teach, false stuff. So he goes right into the temple and he walks right in and starts teaching with all of the teachers around him. And what they don't say he's wrong, they say he's right. And how did that happen? Where did he get the knowledge to be right? So before he starts demonstrating works among these crowd, he establishes himself as somebody who is not leading the people away from Yahweh. He's not teaching against the commandments. Kind of bolsters our case for keeping them, right? The way we still keep them so many years later. And so then they said, how did you get educated? Now he has to go and poke them. He has to go and teach them. He has to go and get their attention and say, my teaching isn't mine, but his who sent me. If anyone is willing to do his will, he will know for the teaching whether it is of God or whether I speak of myself. He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who is seeking the glory of the one who sent him, he is true, and there is no unrighteousness in him. Did not Moses give you the law, and yet none of you carries out the law? Why do you seek to kill me? So he's saying, I haven't broken the Torah. You know the Torah. How are you deciding that you want to kill me? And he's saying that if somebody speaks from himself, he seeks his own glory. This is poking at the Pharisees because they were big into seeking their own glory and seeking offices. And he's saying that if anybody is willing to do Yahweh's will, he'll know the teaching, whether it's from God or from himself. Wait a minute. How could he teach against himself? Doesn't this signify two again? He's talking about his father as somebody else who sent him and being the author of the Torah, and that he has to follow his father's rules and teach it according to that. Just an interesting tangent there. But his teaching is him who sent him, and the crowd now has to go, well, who sent you? Who sent you? Right? You have a demon who seeks to kill you. Who's trying to kill you? And then he comes back and says, I did one deed and all of you marvel. For this reason, Moses has given you circumcision, not because it's from Moses, but from the fathers. And on the Sabbath, you circumcise a man. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses will not be broken, are you angry with me because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. So this is a whole sermon in itself right here. First off, you are not only expected to test, supposed to test the Messiah, we have to. We have to test the Messiah. So a lot of times, especially the way churches have become these top-down organizations where you can't even test the guy speaking, right? Which you guys do all the time. Yeah, if I say something wrong, the mics come out, right? right? Which is good. That's how we got to be, right? So that way we work together. So Yeshua is, at this point in time, the highest authority on the earth, still subservient to the priesthood, not a high priest, because if he was on earth, he wouldn't be high priest, right? Well, Hebrews. But he's expecting to be tested. He's expecting the regular people to test him as far as the Torah goes, as far as his teaching goes, that he's a lawkeeper, that he obeys the Torah. So why is that important for us to remember? Because false messiahs and false teachers will arise. People are going to come, and he's going to say, you don't follow them. How are we going to test them? How are we going to test people who come back and can do miracles? World hasn't seen a lot of public miracles for these 2,000 years. They're going to come back. There are going to be people who can cast fire down from heaven, right? Now, what are we going to say? Okay, that's neat. What does he say? Not just what does he do, what does he say? Is this guy telling you to go to church on a Sunday Sabbath? Right, right. I don't care how much fire you can call down from heaven. Is this guy telling you to go make yourself a ham sandwich? Right, right. That's a false prophet. If they're teaching you, and it's not, Yeshua is telling the regular people should know, not just the educated people, right? The regular people should be able to tell the difference. So when this people come on the scene, we have to be able to test them. And he's telling us in verse 24 that we have the ability to make discernments, to make judgments, right? And using the Torah. If you circumcise a kid on the 8th day, and that 8th day happens to be Shabbat, right? Then why would you not heal a person on Shabbat? right. You can make the connection. You're allowed that latitude not to be so rigid as to say, okay, we're only going to do exactly what it says and nothing else, right? You have to be able to take examples from the Torah and then, okay, the Bible doesn't exactly say, address some issue. Is there anything close to it? As Paul uses the ox, that you can't muzzle an ox while threshing it means that you can pay a minister, right? There's no direct correlation there, but he's allowing the Torah to inform his whole life, not just, being so hyper literal. Gosh, somebody has to have something to say.
Well, I'll mention one thing that is sort of to keep in mind as we go along here is this was during the feast. Now, of course, in the my former fellowship, they always like to stay on theme during the feast, and they had the feast picturing the millennium, the whole 7 days. Yeshua is not staying on theme if that's the feast of this particular day of the feast,
Yeah.
and we'll see that all until we get to the last day of the feast, and then he changes theme, and it fits right in to the millennial setting.
So one of the themes of Sukkot, though, is that was the festival when the Torah was read out loud. I believe it was every 7 years. So by him saying that you should know the whole Torah and Sukkot, that kind of keeps with the theme.
Well, yeah, but it's not a millennial theme.
So, okay. All right. So in verse 25, remember earlier they said, who seeks to kill you? Well, here, five verses later, they seem to know, is this not the man who they're trying to kill? Right? So they did know who was trying to kill him, and some of the people. And so he's speaking publicly, and they're saying nothing to him. The rulers really do not know this is the Messiah, do they? And then these guys say something wrong again, right? Right. However, we know where this man is from, but whenever the Messiah may come, no one knows where he is from. That's not true. We even know a couple verses later. So this is an interesting chapter because you see Yeshua saying, I'm not going to the feast. Then he goes to the feast. Then you see, who's trying to kill you? Oh, we already knew that. Now it says nobody knows where the Messiah is going to come from. A couple verses later, we know exactly where the Messiah is supposed to come from. It's a very, I just see that banter is kind of intriguing. It also teaches us that we must not take one verse and make a doctrine out of it. Right? When you do that, you make a mess because somebody could make a whole sermon out of nobody knew where the Messiah was from. John 7:27, right? If they don't keep reading, right? Can you imagine some guy doing that? I could, right? There's one of that I heard pastors speak on about how the eye is the window of the soul, right? And giving with a clear eye is just a Jewish idiom for being generous. And I've heard sermons in my days gone by of people trying to make something more out of that than what it, like the eye is the window of the soul, and trying to make analogies and whatever, but it doesn't actually mean that. It just means that giving with a clear eye just means that you're generous. Anyhow, the evil eye. Oh no, something being evil. Okay, let's see. Something about an evil eye. A man with an evil eye hastens after wealth and does not know that want will come upon him. Okay, that want meaning desire. Yeah.
Exactly the opposite of the clear eye.
Yeah. Proverbs 28:22. The opposite of the clear eye. Gosh, we just solved that one on accident. Right? Right. Look at that. Yeah. Yeah. 28 to 29. Yeshua cried out in the temple, teaching and saying, "You both know me and know where I am from, and I have not come from myself, but he who sent me is true, whom you do not know. I know him because I am from him, and he sent me." Something that just popped into my head. Should they know that he's from Yahweh because his mom had a virgin birth? Should they have put that together? Because the fact that he's alive and they hadn't consummated the marriage would indicate something a little extra normal going on there, right? Maybe that's what he's talking about when he's saying you should know where he came from, and that he who sent me is true, whom you do not know. Could be poking at him too, because they sometimes say, "Is this not the son of Joseph?" And sometimes they say that Mary was not righteous. So if they, I don't know, it's a little something there. But Marson was talking at lunchtime about strange things that the prophets have to do. How Ezekiel, it came up with somebody said they're going to make Ezekiel's bread, and I'm like, you will not be cooking for potluck with poop. And you, right? And that's not, it was just a joke. But then we talked about how Ezekiel had to do that, and then he had to lay on his side for days, and how Isaiah had to walk around naked for 3 years. And I have here, I actually have that here. I was thinking about this yesterday. Kind of interesting, right? And Jeremiah was tossed in a cistern. The prophets often had to do really wacky stuff, like strange behavior. I was reading Josephus this week because of people are trying to say that most of Revelation has been fulfilled, and they're basing it on events that happened in AD 70. And there's a lot of miracles that happened when the temple went down. There was a crazy prophet who prophesied, who would only say one phrase over and over and over again, that the temple was coming down. And I believe his name, Josephus says the guy's name was Jesus too, right? Which means his name was Yeshua, a different Yeshua. That for 4 years, this guy kept saying this, that the Romans beat him until you could see his bones, and that he would not, that was the only phrase he would ever say until the army came and he was killed. He was smote like with a catapult while he was still saying that phrase. So there's true prophets and stuff do zany things, right? So there's a guy that was prophesying the destruction of the temple for 4 years before it was destroyed. This is from the book of Josephus, history, not scripture. Probably true, maybe true, who knows, right? But there was a bunch of other really nifty miracles that Josephus recorded about AD 70. And I just happened to be reading that because of that, because somebody asked me a question about Revelation being already fulfilled. I was like, where did that come from? Right. Right. But Yeshua is here telling them wacky information. He's talking about, he who sent me is true, whom you do not know. He's talking in these kind of riddles, and he's never really coming out and saying stuff. And that it's kind of obnoxious. Have you guys ever had a teacher like that? Have you ever been in a class with somebody who would never actually answer the question, was always trying to get you to find your own answers, and just bringing you up to the thing? And if you're in a class where you're trying to get a grade, you really want your teacher to say, this is the information that I'm going to test you on, and that test is on this day, and this is when you need to know it, right? You're looking for verse, chorus, verse, and then you find a teacher who doesn't teach that way, but still gives you the tests, right? It's a very frustrating situation. Sir?
I think there's a prophecy that he would speak in parables.
Mm-hmm.
And people say sometimes that John is a different gospel, that it's more philosophical and not parables like the other gospels. But I think he does speak here in like you said, riddles, and there are parables like the um like the sheep will know his voice and things like
Mhm.
that, and that he is the gate. And yeah, so I think, yeah, he came speaking parables so that only certain people like would have ears to hear.
Yeah, that's true. He did. But still, as I read it, I imagine myself there. And oftentimes, even even now, like just spit it out, man. Right? You're just like, what? So after he gets resurrected and he starts explaining things plainly to them, think about the pent-up demand that those guys had, right? That when he finally he says, then beginning with Moses, he teaches everything about himself, right? After the resurrection. They must have been like, wow, how did we miss that? Right? But this is he just kept doing this. And so they were seeking to seize him, but no man laid his hand on him because his hour had not yet come. But many of the crowd believed in him, and they were saying, when the Messiah comes, he will not perform more signs than those which this man has, will he? These This is it. He started with, we did the healing in the synagogue. Then he goes into the temple and he teaches the truth. And the people are like, yeah, that's true. And he's showing that starts with his brothers saying, you guys are free to do this too. You can go do some preaching, right? You go, you're Jewish and you're Torah observant, and you guys can do it too. And he's really a man of the people. He's going out there and teaching directly to the people. He's not going through the synagogue system or the Sanhedrin system, whatever that was, right? The Essenes, they've also been erased from the earth. We don't know what they had, other than Josephus tells us with the Essenes. The Essenes are the people who owned Qumran, right? They owned the Dead Sea Scrolls library, right? They were completely wiped off the face of the earth. We don't have their systems. We have the leftovers of the Pharisee system as today's Orthodox Jews. But he comes talking straight to the man of the people, doing not that many signs here. And many of the crowd believed in him. They're starting to get it. And the Pharisees heard the crowd muttering these things about him, and the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to seize him. Here's the subtitle of today's lesson: the Pharisees are chicken. Okay. Okay. These guys are cowards. They want to sit in the ivory tower and make decrees and put yokes on people that they themselves will not carry. They want a dirty deed done dirt cheap. They want, they want this guy out, but they don't want their fingerprints on it. Geez, is there anything new under the sun? Right? Right? That governor who wasn't deploying his National Guard until he was told to do so by the feds didn't want to have his fingerprints on a response. Right? These guys. And so Yeshua says, for a little while longer I am with you, then I go to him who sent me. You will seek me and will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come. And they're like, neener, right? Right? And he says, the Jews say, where does this man intend to go that we will not find him? He's not intending to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks, is he? Hi, fellow Greeks. They didn't want us to have the Torah. They wanted to have the monopoly. What they had done was made themselves an artificial mediator between man and God. They wanted that buffer. And how did mankind react to that? By doing it again with the Roman Catholic Church. Did exactly the same thing, even with the same garb. Okay. Even with the same reading schedule, the same everything. That's what it turned into, was a new mediator. And they didn't want the Greeks to know. They didn't want us to have the knowledge of Yahweh. Was that why Yahweh created Israel? Was that the kid Okay. It was my kid. Son. All right. All right. All right. So the Greeks, so the reason Israel was a called out people was first mission was to cleanse the sin, the land of Canaan of the sin of those people, right? So those people had it coming. A lot of times people look at the destruction of the Canaanites and they say, oh, what kind of a God would you serve that would slay people like that? But then we find out what those people were guilty of. Okay, now we get it, right? I'm gonna sneeze. Excuse me. So that was my outdoor sneeze. Okay. Okay. So, but then Israel was supposed to be set up to follow Torah and to be blessed, to draw the nations to doing that, a shining city on a hill. Solomon was blessed to build the temple, and all of the world came to that temple to witness it and to give glory to Yahweh. And Solomon botched it by allowing those people by turning it into a multicultural center rather than Yahweh is why we're blessed. So the purpose of Israel was to teach the world about Yahweh, and it became insular after they came back from the captivity. When Nehemiah and Ezra read the law out loud, they all kicked out the foreigners and built a wall around the place. That was a physical wall, was also a metaphorical wall, because they were not allowing the nations to learn. Proselytes were very few, right? They didn't do any type of evangelism. Have you seen any Jewish evangelists come to your door? Right? It's not something they do. They don't want blending. They don't want mixing. It's not without cause, because that blending and that mixing got them thrown into Babylon for 70 years. So they set up a system to not do that again. So these guys don't want the Greeks to know. But the Greeks were knowing, because there were synagogues all over the world and they had the Septuagint in Greek. So go ahead, Everett. Sorry, I was rambling.
Even more so than that, it was a function of Israel initially that they would go out among the nations. I'm sure you remember that they were to build an altar of earth or uncut stone. Where could you build one of those?
Wherever.
Any place you can find dirt or rocks. And Yah promised to come to them.
Yeah.
So that was the initial intention, was that they would understand his ways and go out and teach the nations. It wouldn't require them to come to Jerusalem. But of course, they kind of messed up, and God changed his relationship with them and required them to go to Levi themselves. He wouldn't come to them anymore. They had to go to him. So they had their own problems that they had to overcome.
That's true. Yeah. Before the Exodus, before the Torah, Everett's setting the clock back to wherever they were, they worshiped Yahweh and they set up the tents.
Basically, before the golden calf, it just changed everything.
Yeah. Yep. And then today we're kind of back to that. He says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm in the midst of them.
Exactly.
We're back to that paradigm today.
We're supposed to be the royal priesthood and the holy nation. Yeah.
That's true. All right. So the Jews said to one another, where does this man? Okay, I already read that. And what is this statement? He said, you will seek me and will not find me where I am. You cannot come. Well, then we get to the one where Church of God people will argue and argue and argue. The last day of the feast. I think it's the 8th day. Other people say it's the 7th day. because they say the eighth day is a different festival. I don't know. Right? Right? Right. You haven't heard that? Yeah. Yeah. I don't
No.
yeah.
They were supposed to build the sukkah for 7 days and rejoice for 7 days, according to Leviticus 23. So the
Yeah.
feast is 7 days.
Okay. But the last day of the feast is not a high day in that category.
Well, it's all how you look at it. You know, it's the 7th day, right? Isn't the 7th day a type of Sabbath?
Only if it falls on the Sabbath or like
It
with
doesn't, it doesn't fall on the weekly Sabbath, but by definition, the 7th day is a Sabbath.
I don't get that one. If the seventh day of the Feast of Tabernacles is not a Sabbath.
Well, if you look at the Feast of Tabernacles as an independent entity, as a prophetic event, a time, there are 7 days in the week, the last one being a Sabbath. There are 7 days in Tabernacles. The last one is the 7th day and could be considered a Sabbath.
I'm in the camp that says you can't get to 8 unless you start with 1. Right? Right? I just think that 8th day is the last day, but it doesn't matter, right? It does either way, it doesn't because the 8th day is a gateway, is the gateway holiday between this world and the world to come. So it's kind of, so when people see both things happening on that day, it's supposed to be that way, right? Because it's kind of the day, if you imagine standing with 1 foot in this world and 1 foot in the next, as you're going through. Same way as when they went from one layer of holy area to the next inside the temple, there were gates that you had to go through. So the 8th day is kind of like a gate. So either way we think of it, we come out with the same answer. Okay. Okay. So
I would say it's kind of like what happens when you go through the gate. It's a new beginning.
yeah. 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 So Scott says, there's a guy in here named Scott. You haven't heard his voice yet. I'm not talking to myself. This is not some kind of Shirley MacLaine thing going on here. Right? Right. It said the same thing. The 8th day is 7 days completion. 8th day is the transition. But on the last, and also the great day of the festival, I always imagine myself there. I don't see the 7th day being the great day of the festival. I see the 8th day as the great day of the festival. I see the 8th day as the big hoopla, the big finale. And it's the day where, if you're in the Church of God, you preach to half of an assembly because the other half went home that day. Right? Go ahead, Marcin.
I wonder if if this doesn't rather than corresponding to the Sabbath, if the 8th day corresponds rather to the circumcision on the 8th day.
Oh, yeah.
And it also thematically, just a few verses earlier, like Yeshua was talking about circumcision on the Sabbath.
Ooh,
So
nice.
yeah, maybe he was making a connection to
Right.
the 8th day here.
And so this right here is why we passed microphones. All right. All right. Sorry, Kristen was saying something. Yeah.
Representing the beginning of God's kingdom in all entirety. So all of those have been circumcised, they've been cut off from all the evil that now his domain forever and ever. That's what it represents.
So
Part of the shield. Yeah, now we graduated. Exactly.
so the 8th day, the circumcision is the perfect example, because on the 8th day, a child is both uncircumcised and circumcised. It's the gateway. It's both things happened within that 24-hour period. So and if you look through, do a study on the 8th day and the number 8 in the Bible, you find that a lot. You find that the day that there's a cleansing ritual, and on the 8th day they go and and cleanse themselves. So they were both unclean and clean on the eighth day. And we look at the eighth day as the completion of this world and the beginning of the next. So both things are going to be there. Oh, Jericho. Yes, Jericho was what'd you say? Town down.
Job is finished. Town is down.
Job is finished. The town is down. That was a Jericho reference. Everett?
Also, the Shekinah filled the tabernacle on the eighth day, sort of like the New Jerusalem is coming down and God is dwelling with men.
And we're just rolling with it today. I'm pretty confident that that the first temple was inaugurated during Sukkot and the Shekinah came down on the eighth day. Yeah. So this is it's all over the place as this is being the transition period.
Actually, they had a 7 days inauguration of the altar. And then the eighth day of that was the first day of Sukkot. Pretty sure that's it.
All right. Okay. All right. But he says, if anybody believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. This is another one of these one verseisms. A lot of people talk about this a lot without reading the next verse. Okay. Yes, it's true. He spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for the Spirit was not yet given because Yeshua was not yet glorified. The river of living water is the Holy Spirit, defined right here. So that's pretty interesting. Go. You got it circled. Why do you have it circled? Oh, because it correlates, so I circled it. He's like, I'm a simple man. See, look, that matches. Done. Well, I thought we were going to talk more there, so we can keep going. Some of the people, therefore, when they heard these words, were saying, "This is certainly the prophet." Others were saying, "This is the Messiah." Still others were saying, "Surely the Messiah is not going to come from Galilee, is he? Has not the scripture said that the Messiah comes from the descendants of David and from Bethlehem, the village where David was?" So the people had the knowledge. His prodding turned the key. They got to start seeing him. And then they start thinking, well, wait a minute. Maybe we can figure out and solve this puzzle. And so there was a division that occurred in the crowd because of him. They actually knew where the Messiah would come from after all. And he starts dividing. Later, is it later in this gospel or in other gospels, he says he didn't come to bring peace, but to bring a sword. Okay. This is that division that the sword is dividing, like as Solomon was going to split the baby, remember? He comes to actually make people who are willing to hear are going to hear. And some people are not willing to hear. And some people we have doctrinal walls built up, things that can't be challenged. But he says it's okay to challenge him and we'll get some answers. So some of them wanted to seize him, but no one laid hands on him. Chickens. And the officers then came to the chief priests and Pharisees. They said to him, "Why did you not bring him?" Oh, really? The Pharisees are like, they'll talk harsh to their officers, but they won't go do the work themselves. Isn't that something? Isn't that something special? If they want him seized, but they're not willing to do it themselves. And the officers answered and said, "No man, never has a man spoken the way this man speaks." And the Pharisees then answered, "You have not been led astray, have you? No one of the rulers or Pharisees has believed in him, has he? They're building these walls. but building these walls, reinforcing the walls, putting up a parapet. But this crowd, which does not know the law, is accursed. Well, Mr. Religious Leader, if the crowd doesn't know the Torah, whose fault is that? Right? Whose fault is that, bucko? Right. You want to walk around with your phylacteries broadened, with all the chief seats in the synagogue, and you want to have all this, and you can't even do your job. The reason the Pharisees came to be was because of what happened with Nehemiah and Ezra. When the people who knew Hebrew interceded for the people who did not know Hebrew, you started an education system that grew to something good. The synagogue system, the Torah portions, these things all came out of that. They decided that education was the key to keeping Israel from going into captivity again, from going back into idolatry, that they set up a system that wasn't in the Torah. And Yeshua in Luke 4 effectively started his ministry in the synagogue. So he accepted it. It wasn't in the Torah. It wasn't in the original instructions, but it happened, and it happened for a reason, so that the people would have the Torah and be able to recognize the Messiah when he came. Because without the knowledge of the Tanakh, who's the Messiah? Whoever just can do cool stuff, right? Right? Isn't that what Sunday Christians look at the Messiah as? Somebody, some guy who could do cool stuff and died innocently, right? They so so the sorry, a little girl did something funny for those online. So the Messiah comes and the people have to be able to recognize him. So you can't just say the law has been done away with, the law is nailed to the cross. You don't need that Old Testament, because without the Old Testament, Yeshua the Messiah becomes Jesus, the blue-eyed guy on the cross, right? Just some guy. And what his teaching that just came at a moment in time, a random moment in time, or that a guy who came with a lot of compassion and could heal people and had some good teachings. With the Old Testament, he becomes the Son of God. He becomes the person who bruised the head of the serpent. He becomes all of these fulfillments from Psalm 2 to Psalm 222 to Isaiah 53, all of these things that talk about the Messiah coming. And so the people needed to know the Torah. And this guy said the crowd which doesn't know the law is accursed. So not only do they not want the Greeks to know, they don't want the Jews to know either. Well, that's like the mystery religions. The mystery religion is where the priest sets up basically a profit center, Profit, and pays for absolution of sins, and is an arbitrary mediator between man and God. So Nicodemus, who came to him before, being one of them. See, Nicodemus gets honor here. He says, our Torah doesn't judge a man unless it first hears from him and knows what he is doing, does it? Now, who's the bravest of them all? Nicodemus is willing to stand up to these guys who are already openly contemplating murdering Yeshua. And he's one of them and says, hold the phone. We have a Torah. You're talking about the Torah. Doesn't it say we have to hear from him and know what he's doing? And they don't want to hear it. They answered, you are not also from Galilee, are you? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee. Well, he wasn't from Galilee, was he? You know, he was born in Bethlehem. And this says everybody went to his home. It means his own home. Doesn't mean that everybody went to Nicodemus's home. And it's a pretty good chapter break. Anybody have anything to add? Any more bunny trails?
Yeah, I'll mention one thing. You know, the Jews have a name for the seventh day of the feast called Hosanna Rabbah. They don't have a name for any other day.
Yeah.
Means great salvation. And the Talmud records, as I remember, that they had a great celebration that they said, if you've never seen this, you've never seen a party, is basically what they said. So they had a great celebration on that seventh day of Tabernacle.
That wasn't man-made.
Oh, well, Terry says wasn't man-made, but we did just get through saying that some of the man-made stuff was accepted. So,
yeah.
yeah. But they do, eighth day is called Shemini Atzeret. So there's a name for eighth day too. Yeah. And, which all the world should know that after October 7th, the world should know what Shemini Atzeret is. But they don't. They just know it was the Sabbath. They don't realize it was the eighth day of Sukkot too. So, oddly quiet. Guess we're done.